the HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, we get into part 3 of our 3-part mini-series on this awesome conversation regarding pharmacy benefit managers. Picking up where we left off. If you missed the last couple of weeks, this is part 3 in a 3-part mini-series. Go back and catch those. Otherwise, let's get into the episode.
And this could be a great time to bring in the elephant in the room, rebates.
Right? That was my elephant impression. I'm known for it.
So you're right. So GLP-1s on average are $1,000 to $1,500, and I'm covering a broad spectrum there. A month, and even in fact per dose, depending on the person's needs. They were designed initially to be a option for diabetic members to take something that was not something that's currently available on the market that wasn't as effective. Now, it has broad indications, and indications are what a medication can be prescribed for. And so jokingly all aside, GLP-1s have conquered the indication nation trend, which they're now being prescribed for infertility, for weight loss, for
alcoholism, sleep apnea,
heart issues, heart disease, whatever. I mean, whatever.
Rolled my ankle the other day and they offered me a GLP, bro.
Yeah, Wegovy's right there. I think, honestly, the end of the day, when you talk about rebates, it's a good idea to talk about it in relation to GLP-1s when they're $1,200 drug.
Am I going to derail you if we say, let's define rebates real quick? Or do you want to finish your thought?
Yeah.
Okay, so really broadly, I think sometimes you give, if you have a different analogy, but mine is sort of like you go in to buy a washer dryer or whatever, and the price says $500, but you get a $100 manufacturer rebate.
Yeah.
You give whoever, Pacific Sale is your $500. You go home, you mail it in, you get $100 back from the manufacturer of that washer dryer. Now, effectively, that has cost you $400 because you spent the $500, you got $100 back. This is happening every time your employees are filling a script. Not every time, but many, many times they're filling a script. They're triggering a rebate back from that drug manufacturer. And what gets more insidious about the rebates is what's rebatable, how much they're giving back, where the incentives are. So, hey, if you push this much of X drug, now you're going to get this much back in rebate. And to me, probably one of the most insidious parts of all this is the amount. We're not talking hundreds or thousands of dollars. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in the plan spend, right? It can be, you'll know better than me, but I don't know, 10, 15% of the total RX spend might be rebatable type of a thing, or maybe more. I guess it depends on the drugs that are being issued. But my point is, if those rebates are not going back to the employer, if you're out there, you're paying the cost of this drug, you're paying the plan spend, and the rebate's just being kept by the TPA or the PBM along the way, and you don't even know about them. They're not even sharing with you how much I'm pushing your employees to get a drug.
Yep. That
drug is triggering money to me, and I'm just keeping it.
Yes.
And now insert the GLP-1 conversation with that definition of rebate, or if you want to expand on my rebate over 101.
You did a great job synopsing the rebate strategy of most PBMs and the traditional model. And that is sort of indicative of the carriers and the PBMs. And that was, 10 years ago, what was happening everywhere. Things have changed a lot. I think it's kind of prudent to back up a little bit. And rebates were actually something a very large client told Express Scripts 30 years ago to go do. And so the story I had heard in the industry was that Home Depot went to Express Scripts and said, you need to continue to lower our drug costs. And they were like, well, we've done everything we can against the pharmacies. They're paying us 80%, discount on some of these medications. What else do you want us to do? And they're like, figure it out or we're firing you. Yeah. And so Express Scripts went out to the manufacturer and says, we need more money for the drugs.
By the way, rebates starting with the washer dryer salesman is great because that was just my analogy.
That's the story I heard. So
right.
Yeah, whether or not that's
it's lore.
Yes, lore, PBM lore. Yes, I love it.
When you guys sit around the PBM campfire and you tell PBM ghost stories, this is the PBM.
There are so many lineage stories in the PBM industry. I can't even begin to. We could talk hours for
this is why I want to do a podcast. Right. Conversations like this happening behind the scenes that we need to heat up cameras for.
Yes, I mean, and there's a lot of really good people in the PBM industry too, trying to do what's best. The rebate game, as it were, in the PBM world is really trying to help reduce prices from a cost perspective. And so the original intent was, these brands are more expensive, these specialties were more expensive. how can we get them down and where can we go to source that additional cost? The right PBMs like MedOne are going to say, hey, we're going to go to that manufacturer that we actually have to get this medication from your member. We're going to get whatever we can from them and we're going to dispense it to you. Your analogy of, hey, we're going to, gives you some back is definitely indicative of that traditional model, right? The model that is being highly scrutinized. There's lawsuits up the wazoo for these PBMs.
And by the way, not just against the PBMs, against the plan sponsors. There's the Johnson & Johnson case where they're looking at the like benefits team. They're saying, did you live under a rock?
There are tons and tons of lawsuits that are not being publicized from bigger companies that unfortunately are just happening, all the time. In fact, it would be too difficult for us to keep up with all of them. But suffice it to say is, are the plan sponsors being a good fiduciary of the actual employer costs?
Per their ERISA duty.
Per their ERISA duty. And I think, figuring out where your values are based from a PBM partner perspective dials right back into what we were talking about earlier. Finding a partner that's going to not necessarily act as a fiduciary, but act in your best interest and provide as much access to employees as possible for the cheapest medications possible is generally where you should be, kind of shooting your arrow, as it were. But the rebate game in general is unfortunately unfolded to be a profit center, right? For those large PBMs, those traditional
Which I don't
models.
even know if we talked about this, but the PBMs themselves, so the profit center inside of the PBM, who is now inside of the carrier because they vertically align. So we talked about CVS Caremark, we talked about Aetna. When we talked about Prime, they're jointly owned by, I think, 19 of the Blues. And we talked about Express Optum being UHC, Express Script and Cigna, right? These guys are vertically aligned. So now you're like, hey, there's a profit center inside of a profit center inside of your health insurance.
And I won't pretend to know a lot about medical loss ratio information. That's more your role versus mine. But from what I understand, it's a lot of this vertical integration has actually happened so they could bury more profits.
That's right.
And so that's the frustrating part of it. So when you are self-funded and you do carve out the PBM business, you're actually taking that power back from the carrier.
That's right.
I highly encourage people to review this and think about this because...
And by power, you mean profit.
Like power, mean profit.
Yes, man. I'm pulling that back. I'm untethering this stuff.
Yeah. So I think to your point, what about the rebates? How does it circle back to GLP-1s, right? So recap, GLP-1s are a $1,200 drug. It's there to help per month. It's there to help members who are diabetic, who are really, at their last resort, the ones that really truly need a better medication than perhaps metformin. And it is something that is groundbreaking. It is a scientific advancment.
Yeah, it's a whole new class of drugs. I heard a physician saying it's like penicillin almost. Like it's a whole new class of drug. Sort of, yeah.
And it is also a highly rebatable drug. It is insane how big the rebates are. There it is. So the rebates, in a realistic perspective, are anywhere from a few $100s to almost $1,000 just as they are. So now you're talking about the cost of the GLP-1 is really only $200. And that's where the tricky part is of who you're working with from a PBM perspective, your partner. They may be approving these GLP-1s so they could capture that $1,000, maybe pass you back $300, right? Because if you look at your contracts for your PBM, you're probably getting $300 or so for your brands. And that's not the full rebate from the GLP-1. So that's why they allow the flood to happen. And that's the frustrating part, right?
I've also heard, and let me know if this is just PBM lore, but some of the rebates are being withheld if the employer starts to put guidelines around how widely applicable they're going to allow the GLP-1s to be. Specifically, if you as an employer try to put in obesity application strategies, you might negate the rebate. Like they're just like, well, I'm not going to give you a rebate. If you don't let everybody that's,
wants to take a GLP-1 for weight loss, for lifestyle, for cheaper airline tickets.
Then now contractually, we won't be rebating your GLP-1.
Right. And that's the manufacturer saying that.
Right.
Yes. They will actually examine a PBM's formulary to decide whether or not they are being fairly assessed from a prioritization or a step therapy perspective. And it's frustrating because it's like, yes, we want to allow members to have the access, but no, if a plan sponsor doesn't want to pay for it for other indications outside of diabetes, then they shouldn't have to.
But doesn't that mean then that the PBM whose business model is set up to not receive rebates and therefore not need them is a partner to consider, because now you don't need to look at the manufacturer and say, oh, shoot, I should probably have a conversation with the employer about whether or not they're going to do this GLP-1 strategy because it's going to impact my bottom line. If you, the PBM, are collecting the rebates at all, that then puts you kind of squarely in the conversation of, well, hang on, that changes how I get paid.
And that's why transparent PBMs have become such an important role in what's going forward in this industry. Yep. Because the traditional PBM would say, yeah, oh wait, hey, you're gonna take away some of my profit, some of my golden goose, right? Because these GLP-1s, let's face it, were a huge rebates center revenue for these large PBMs, for the traditional ones. But the transparent ones, they don't care. If you want to take a GLP-1, you want to provide coverage for weight loss, sure. Yep. If that's what you want to do as an employer, it's your right. Mm-hmm. We will give you whatever rebate we get from the manufacturer at the end of the day.
And so employers listening know the most recent data I looked up, which again was a couple months ago, but somewhat recent, is about 60 to 90% of employers allow GLP-1s for the treatment of diabetes. And the range is so big because smaller employers tend not to do it as much as larger employers do. And about 40 to 68% of employers allow GLP-1 utilization for the treatment of obesity. So if you're wondering where you fall in that range as an employer, let's call it, 80-ish percent, 90% of employers, yes, diabetes. Now it's down to 60-ish percent that are also yes for obesity. You need to make these calls. And Kaiser, actually, interestingly enough, for its fully insured cases, it's like a checkbox on the app now. Hey, do you want this coverage for kind of the narrow definition, or do you want to apply this broadly and allow people to cast a wider net in who gets to put their hand up and have your plan pay for this?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, to be fair, I'm not sure I agree with those statistics.
Okay.
I would agree that a lot of the employers, probably 70% or greater, are allowing GLP-1s coverage for diabetes.
Yeah,
ultimately, it is a necessary medication, right? For the ones that are requiring prioritizations or documentations to treat obesity, I would say that's probably 40% is even a high number.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there's not other medications that are weight loss.
I think it includes like BMI over 40 though, like really truly.
Depends. Yeah. So a good PBM, you could be able to customize that.
Right.
And the customization doesn't have to be extreme. Maybe it's a couple BMI in between. Yeah. Maybe it's other comorbidities. It doesn't. There's so many other things you could ask for to make sure that it's an applicable treatment. You can still take metformin as a weight loss medication. Right. It's like $10 a script.
Right.
So it's really not that costly. And if they haven't tried that first for weight loss, why not? Right. And I'm not saying that I'm against people losing weight. I want to make that explicitly clear because I think that it comes off sometimes that way. I'm all for people getting healthy. As healthy as they possibly can be in the environment, the situation they can be in. I'm all supportive of that. But if you're going to cover weight loss from an employer perspective, help them out by providing coaching, by providing incentives for better meals, something to help them along that journey other than the medication, because that's not the single solution point.
Correct. And I'll tie all this together because we talked a moment ago about ERISA compliance. We talked about putting on your plan fiduciary hat, not your this is my friend hat. And when these drugs are, let's call them $10,000-ish a year, the other thing that isn't necessarily talked about or we haven't touched on yet is over half, 55, 60% of people that get on these drugs will be off them within a year.
Yep. So
you, the employer, now have this liability of if we apply it to obesity, 40% of our population that is going to cost me an extra $10,000 per employee per year for ostensibly nothing because they got on it for a while, but whether it wasn't effective enough or the side effects or whatever the case is, they're back off of it. So now that's money that's just poof out the door. So when you're talking about step therapy, I don't hear, oh, look at this guy, he's against weight loss. It's, hey, there's some real cost ramifications here that make it make sense. There's an order to these things sometimes when they're this costly. And even if you're going to go on the GLP-1 for long term, maybe for life, how long as an employer, what's my average employee turnover? How long do I have to have this employee before I start seeing the plan spend going down, right? So these are the things you have to grapple with when it's your job to sit in the chair for that employer and make these calls.
Absolutely. I think you bring up several really good points about the difference between cures and treatments, which was kind of an overarching theme there. You could take it for 8 to 10 months and not be cured of a particular thing. Now, I'm not calling obesity a disease to be cured or anything like that. What I am saying is that it's not Hep C where we have a cure for. 6 to 8 months later, you're cured of Hep C as long as you follow the treatment correctly, right? insert little doctor note there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, weight loss management, those types of things, it's a lifetime change. And so you're right. How long is it before you actually see changes in your other spends that you fronted this one spend for, right? You fronting the spend for GLP-1 utilization, but are you going to see a reduction in diabetic visits for urgent cares, for practitioners, for whatever test strips, all that stuff? Maybe not. But what I can say is that if you coach people to be healthier, the general consensus is that once they come out of that, they're generally going to look at things differently. But there is a yo-yo effect, right? You know, you get off these medications, you have 6 to 8 months of cleaner eating, and then all of a sudden you yo-yo back to, unfortunately, bad habits or what have you.
Your metabolic rate is so changed by it that even then trying to keep the good habits, it's
very difficult, right? And they were
muscle loss.
There's been speculation that that members actually retain weight quicker after using a GLP-1. I'm not a scientist. I can't confirm or deny that kind of stuff. But what I will say that people have had great success with GLP-1s. There's also the class of people who are diabetic and have had terrible side effects. I personally have a family member who I was, kind of pushing them to do more research about the side effects of their GLP-1 utilization, because they were definitely developing muscle atrophy. Yeah. They were going into brain fog. Yep. They were having intestinal issues. Yep. And once they got off of that, their symptoms reduced. Yeah. Which to me was a direct correlation of, hey, I need to be on a medication that's this strength, but maybe this one isn't the right one for me. So,
man, I think we've touched on so much today, and I'm pretty sure we're breaking this into a couple episodes because we ran long. But just to bring us home in this world, in this space, I know we've dived down a couple rabbit holes. Anything else you kind of want to get us out on, or it's like, hey, we didn't spend enough time on this or any time on this, but just while I'm here in the chair, I'd love to punctuate, a final thought.
I mean, we've done a good job, articulating the fact that a good PBM partner should be able to stand by the employer's side and develop a plan that would really, fine tune the vision of what they want to do and help build what their corporate culture is, right? I work with all sorts of plan sponsors who want a completely rich benefit, and they want a very restrictive benefit because they want to manage costs. And so there's a spectrum for everybody. The other part of this is really to not be afraid of change. The biggest excuse I think we get in the market is that I don't want to make these decisions because I don't want to affect change on my membership. But it is part of our nature, right? Change is constant. We always have to adapt and learn something new. But having that fear of change is so much greater than actually taking the dive into having that better partner. So that's what the one message I'll leave is, don't be afraid to change your pharmacy benefit plan just because you're afraid of the consequences of prior experiences.
That's a big ticket item. It's worth exploring.
It is.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right, man. I appreciate you being on today. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for you on this week's episode. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, Rula, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions, keeping the lights on. Thank you guys for joining us. Blessed to be here. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.